To my constituents, I'm just letting you know I am still staying in the riding to take care of my newborn, but I'm happy to participate in hybrid fashion on your behalf on this very important subject. Bill C-39, an act to amend the criminal code, medical assistance in dying, seeks to delay the expansion of medically assisted death to individuals whose sole mental condition is a mental illness. We are here today because of previous legislation, last Parliament's Bill C-7, which responded to the Truchon decision and the Justice Minister's interpretation of it by removing critical safeguards to accessing MAID, particularly that death must be reasonably foreseeable. In Bill C-7, it contained an arbitrary deadline of March 17th, 2023, to expand MAID to those whose sole condition is a mental illness. And now this government seeks to delay that arbitrary deadline another year down the road. As I don't want MAID to be offered to those solely suffering from mental health, I will be supporting this bill, but I do so in the context of very big and life-altering concerns regarding the direction the Government of Canada has taken since the debate on MAID commenced in 2016. Conservatives believe that we should never give up on those experiencing mental illness, and we should always be focused on offering help and treatment rather than assisted death. Conservatives will bring forward alternative proposals to support those with mental illness instead of this government's approach. Going back to 2016, in the preamble of Bill C-14, it spoke about the vulnerability of persons, and it states that whereas vulnerable persons must be protected from being induced in moments of weakness to end their lives, it stated that whereas suicide is a significant public health issue that can have lasting and harmful effects on individuals, families, and communities, man, have we seen a lot of change in the last 7 years. Conservative members at the time, despite these assurances in Bill C-14, that the approach of the government was going down a slippery slope. The member from Selkirk Interlake Eastman highlighted a concern that has sadly now become a reality in Canada. He stated, and I quote, "Many believe that the policy will be used prematurely to end the lives of those who have become a burden to their families, society, or the medical system." At the time, because of the big public concerns, there were many Liberal members who were careful when it came to speaking about expanding MAID in the future. The former Justice Minister, Jody Wilson-Raybould, said that, and I quote, "In terms of eligibility, the policy choice made by the government was to focus on persons who are in an advanced state of irreversible decline and whose natural deaths have become reasonably foreseeable." The current member from Lac Saint Jean said Bill C-14 would not normalize medically assisted dying, as perhaps has occurred in Belgium and the Netherlands, the two most often cited examples of the slippery slope point of view. In the last Parliament, in his charter considerations on the original on Bill C-7 that expanded MAID to include those without a reasonably foreseeable death, the current Minister of Justice cited inherent risks and complexity as a reason not to expand MAID to those with mental illness as a sole condition. The Minister of Justice, unfortunately, we find today, is speaking on both sides of this issue very irresponsibly. On the one hand, he communicated in the C-7 charter consideration that due to the complexity and inherent risks, we should not be expanding MAID to those with mental illness as a sole condition. On the other hand, in the same bill, he included a sunset clause to expand MAID to those Canadians and says his hands are tied by a Quebec court decision that this government has not only refused to challenge at the Supreme Court, but that leading legal experts in our country state that his interpretation of the decision is flawed. After warning Canadians time and time again that the legalization of MAID would not lead to a slippery slope into allowing death on demand for any citizen whenever they may want it, this government seems set on expanding MAID to anyone. I plead with backbench members of the Liberal Party to stand up against the Justice Minister today. The decisions, you have more influence than any Canadians right now to stop what he is trying to do. Do not forget that in 2016 on Bill C-14, he voted against the
Well, we have a point of order from the Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House.
I can certainly appreciate the passion in the member's speech, but he did just start talking directly to Liberal members, and he said, you have power. I'm certain that he wasn't talking about you, Madam Speaker, and perhaps he just wants to rephrase that.
I appreciate the honourable member's notice. I actually hadn't paid attention. Yes, the honourable member has to speak to the chair. Just a reminder.
Well, through you, Madam Speaker, I will implore Liberal members of Parliament to stand up against their Justice Minister and the irresponsible decisions that the Justice Minister is taking. Across Canada, every year we celebrate Bell Let's Talk. Mental health services have expanded in hospitals, in schools, and universities because there is an inherent belief by all Canadians that mental health challenges are things that we can overcome. Every family in this country is impacted by mental health, and it pains me to see my country considering offering death to those suffering at their lowest point. We do not need to do this. So again, through you, Madam Speaker, I implore Liberal members to challenge the Justice Minister on his overly broad interpretation of the Turchon decision, the rulings made in the Quebec court, to stop what the Minister of Justice wants to do. A recent article in the Globe and Mail talked about Donna Duncan, a 63-year-old woman from my community. Her daughter successfully delayed through court her mother's access to MAID because her mother suffered from a mental illness. However, just hours after leaving the hospital, Donna received medically assisted death without her daughters being informed, even though their mother already suffered from a mental health condition that was documented. Both daughters, Alicia and Christy, testified to the medical assistance in death committee, and they made a number of recommendations. And the number one seems so sensible: mandatory access to healthcare. Number two, an increase in the required number of independent witnesses to be formally interviewed as part of the assessment to 3 people. 3, a pre-death assessment review. Doctors should be required to submit all assessments to an independent review board prior to a patient's death. 4, continuity of care. Multiple assessments should be completed by the same medical professional. 5, mandatory wait periods. And 6, mandatory release of records. Hospitals and health authorities should be required to release unredacted copies of their MAID assessment records to those who are entitled to them. When C-39 was tabled in Parliament, I would be remiss if I didn't mention the fact that the Association of Chairs of Psychiatry in Canada called for this delay at the beginning of December. And I will note as well that University of Law professor Trudeau Lemons and numerous colleagues from across Canada challenged the Minister of Justice on his actions today. So again, my plea today is to the Liberal caucus, through you, Madam Chair, to challenge the decision of the Justice Minister not to irresponsibly expand MAID in 1 year's time for those suffering from mental health. Canadians know that mental health can be overcome. Canadians know that this doesn't have to be the solution. Canadians know that they want to take care of people when they need to be taken care of. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
I guess the first thing I'll say is I sincerely appreciate the incredible passion that this member has demonstrated today in his speech, and I congratulate him for relaying that in such a passionate manner to the House. The second thing I'll say is that I certainly can say that I personally take great opportunity to reflect on this legislation that and the issue that's before us. So I don't want the member to think that there aren't members of the Liberal bench that are certainly always keeping a high concern over the manner in which this medical procedure would be used. And then finally, what I would ask him is that I'm unsure exactly what he's asking when he makes a plea to Liberal backbenchers in his terms. The whole point to this extension is to make sure that everything that is in place is done so in a responsible and appropriate manner. And he, by his own admission, is voting in favor of this extension. So what is it that he's asking exactly? Is he asking for something that is supposed to happen a year from now?
Thank you to the member for the opportunity to clarify a key point. And that is, I do not believe that mental health sicknesses should be a reason for someone to receive MAID in Canada. The legislation before us today will delay the ability of medical professionals to offer MAID on the basis of mental health sicknesses. I do not want to see my country ever reach that point. So in the year ahead, through you, Madam Speaker, I implore the Liberal members of Parliament to challenge their Justice Minister, because I know and they know that the large majority of Canadians are against this. In fact, I did a survey in my community, and while my community was equally divided on MAID in general, there was unanimity by all of my constituents that at a minimum, proper medical supports, mental health supports should be offered to all people irrespective of their medical conditions, and especially for those considering the use of MAID. Thank you, Madam Speaker.